9. Hard to forget. If you take even a single glance at Ohio's Elisa Zabrowski's face, you won't be able to forget her. And it's not Zabrowski's beauty that will remain in your mind, but her unforgettable number of face tattoos. After all, not many people opt for calavera-themed face tattoos, right? The 27-year-old's eyelids are painted black and encircled in red with tiny semicircle motifs. The top of her nose is tattooed completely black. Elisa's skull inspiration is evident from the cheek contour design and tattooed ridges on her lips. The most prominent piece on her face is the web-like motif on her forehead. With such shocking art on her face, she's easy to remember. This would have been cool for her if she wasn't involved in crime. Elisa's tattoos give her identity away a little too easily. The chance of someone else having a face tattoo with that combination is probably 1 in a million. And actually, her criminal record rivals the numbers of tattoos that she has. Till 2019, she has been recorded to have been in jail 3 different times. In December 2018, Elisa was arrested when she stole a bag from Walmart. During a search, cops found that she had been hiding a needle and small bags of methamphetamine in her purse. She was thereafter charged with theft and possession of narcotics. And just a few weeks ago, she was arrested in Austintown for obstructing official business and failed to appear in court. She got arrested thrice within just 6 months. Now that's some record by itself. 8. Looking like $1 million. Choosing a path of crime when you have a face tattoo is probably one of the worst ideas ever. And yet, face tattoos are popular among criminals. And we totally get why criminals would choose to get inked on their face. It definitely gives an edgy look and warns others to not mess with them. However, on the downside, the same tattoos make them incredibly easy to be recognized. Cincinnati's Michael Mann was one of the unfortunate ones who got caught, all thanks to his face tattoos. Mann has numerous tattoos on his face and neck, including 2 lipstick marks on his cheek and forehead. He even has the infamous teardrop tattoo that symbolizes gangs and prison. But the most prominent aspect of his face is the huge $sign symbol inked on his left eye. 35-year-old man was arrested in 2018 for 2 counts of felony kidnapping. He had held a victim for ransom. He was on the run for a month before finally being arrested by the police. But that is not the only crime he has committed in his life. Man has a long history of aggravated robbery, domestic violence, and drug charges. In fact, earlier that same year, he was arrested for domestic violence and robbery. Man had climbed into a home in South Fairmont and choked and slapped a victim numerous times. He is now serving his term at the Hamilton County Justice Center. 7. Thug Angel. Angel tattoos are pretty common. We've all seen someone with an angel tattoo, or at least with a pair of angel wings. Such tattoos can represent many things, ranging from hope to freedom. It might have become a cliche now, but angel tattoos still have many fans from different walks of life. Who knew that thugs were also fans of angels? 22-year-old Benjamin Austin Page from Florida was arrested in 2020 for murdering his own lover. The ex-convict had an elaborate face tattoo of doves and machine guns. Some weird combinations out there, aren't there? But there's more. He had the Louis Vuitton logo tattooed on his nose and the word BANG etched in bold letters on his forehead. The most interesting piece on his face was that of an angel holding a machine gun. Yeah, but that's not the only gun inked. He also had 2 guns tattooed on his right cheek and teardrops under his eyes, which are generally identified as a symbol of time spent in prison. Boy, are those guys proud of having been behind bars. Needless to say, when he was arrested, the tattoos were the first thing everyone noticed. So let's get down to the story at hand, of how he murdered his partner. Page had been dating Terrence Brown, a self-taught makeup artist. The two had first interacted over social media and then started going out. But things got out of hand when Brown refused to delete some explicit images that Page had shared with him. Angered by this, Page, in a fit of rage, went to Brown's home in Florida and shot him in his front yard. Not once, but several times. Even though an emergency call was made, Brown couldn't be saved. According to police reports, only 4 months before the murder, Page had been released from his 4-year-long stint as a convict. He also had a solid criminal record that dated back to 2011, which included burglary, theft, possession of drugs, and weapons. He was charged with second-degree murder and for having possession of a weapon, being an ex-convict, in the month of May 2020. He is likely to be sentenced to life without a chance at parole. Looks like he needed more time to mend his ways. Do you have any unique tattoos? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Florida Man, Inc. We all have a special connection with our home, our country, our motherland. But would you go to the extent of getting a tattoo of the state map you were born in? That might sound like taking the love a tad too far. But Matthew Leatham disagrees. The man isn't just in love with Florida, he is extremely proud of it too. So proud that he got a tattoo of Florida's map right on his forehead. It's the first thing you notice about him, even before his eyes. Fortunately, Leatham isn't a kidnapper or a murderer, but he has been arrested nonetheless. And the reason for his arrest might just make you laugh at his ingenuity. It was 4 a.m. and the 22-year-old was in the Newport Rishi suburb of Tampa, badly in need of a ride home. Now, how many of us have been in that kind of situation before? A normal person in his place would try to book a cab online or try to hitch a ride or even call their friends for help. But Leatham had a better plan in mind. He took out his phone and dialed 911. Not for an emergency, but to request a ride home. A deputy found Leatham and asked if he should call him a cab, but Leatham refused and said he didn't have any money. He began walking again, but after a few minutes, he made another 911 call. No, he wasn't having a heart attack or a seizure. He was just requesting a ride home all over again. The same officer caught up to him again. Leatham was found to have had possession of marijuana. He was arrested and charged with misuse of the 911 system and also for carrying marijuana. He was later released on a $300 bond. 5. Psychopathic tattoo. 37-year-old Timothy J. Wachowski was fired from his job at a car dealership, and he was looking for a way to get revenge. With a long list of crimes that he already had on his rap sheet, adding another set of charges probably didn't seem like a big deal. Or maybe Wachowski let anger get the best of him. Wachowski has a large tattoo on his forehead of the word psychopath. According to reports, the tattoo is inspired by his love for the Psychopathic Records label based in Detroit, which is most popular for being the home of Insane Clown Posse. On April 27, 2020, Wachowski arrived at the dealership seething with rage. A 49-year-old male employee approached him when Wachowski pulled out a knife and stabbed his ex-colleague numerous times. He had managed to inflict wounds to his hands, arms, and back. As another employee approached Wachowski after hearing the scuffle, he ran away. After a 15-minute-long search, he was found hiding in a nearby field. During the trial, the judge couldn't help but comment that Wachowski had one of the longest histories of criminal activity that she had ever seen. He had been arrested numerous times before for drunk driving and for crashing into other vehicles, among other things. 4. Trophy Tat. In 2016, Chicago's Santo Lozoya met Crispin Colis at a Dunning neighborhood convenience store. Colis was on his way back from a Chicago Bulls game, and Lozoya had other plans in mind for the rest of the night. Lozoya, who goes by the street name Saint, was from a rival gang called Milwaukee Kings. He, along with a few other gang members, brutally shot and killed Crispin. Crispin's death was just one of many which took place in the neighborhood, and all of which were carried out by the Milwaukee Kings. After the successful kill, Lozoya and his aide, Jose Martinez, got a trophy tattoo to commemorate the murder. Both of them got the logo of Douce's Liquor done right below their eyes. According to Lozoya's statements, the two had the same liquor after the murder, so getting the logo inked on their face seemed like a good way to celebrate. The symbol has another hidden meaning depicting the Cross of Lorraine, a French emblem that symbolizes courage, honor, and perseverance. Earlier this year, Lozoya pleaded guilty for his role in the Milwaukee Kings street gang. The gang is infamous for using shootings, murder, beatings, and other forms of violence to strengthen the gang's control and power in the city's Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. The gang had recruited Lozoya when he was still in high school, and he said that once the gang laid their eyes on him, it was close to impossible to find a safe way out of their grips. Apparently, Lozoya led a baseball team that had made it to the national finals, but looks like he chose the wrong path for himself. In August 2021, he was sentenced to 33 years in prison. 3. Gucci. In 2016, 33-year-old Kamprasong Thamavong was taken into custody for possession of firearms. The man from Fresno, California was tattooed heavily and had Gucci written across his forehead in bold letters. He also had numerous teardrop tattoos and a lipstick mark on his cheek. Thamavong's entire scalp is covered with ink, and even his lips have been tattooed with black ink. Thamavong was first spotted by the cops at a traffic stop. According to the statement released by the police department, one of the officers on duty, Officer Howard, had contacted the driver, who was identified as Thamavong. Officer Howard learned that Thamavong had been on AB 109 probation and an already documented Laos Blood gang member. The officer called for assistance at the traffic stop, and Thamavong's residence was searched. They found several items of the gang, and most importantly, they had found photographs of Thamavong clutching onto a variety of firearms. Upon digging deeper, the authorities found the same firearms that Thamavong was holding in the pictures. He even had 39 marijuana plants growing at his home. Thamavong neither had a license to grow marijuana at home, nor was he registered to own the guns. He was arrested for several charges, including the cultivation of marijuana and being in possession of firearms. He was sent to the Fresno County Jail. 2. World's Scariest Criminal. You need to do something really gruesome to be called the world's scariest criminal. 46-year-old Michael Campbell has a long list of crimes that make him more than capable of earning that title, but it was his face tattoos that earned him a spot on this list. Campbell has been a sex offender since 1995, and his most recent crime in October 2021 includes attempted rape. He broke into a home and tried to force himself on a woman while her partner was sleeping right next to her. Campbell was caught in the act, but he managed to escape on a bicycle. After he was arrested, he said it was actually the woman who had made the move on him, and that he wasn't even interested in her. So, what was he doing in their house exactly? He's being held on a $100,000 bond in a Missouri County jail. If Campbell is found guilty, he will most likely face a life sentence. Much like his crimes, his face tattoos also have dark secrets. Campbell's face and body are almost completely enveloped in black tattoos. His face tattoos include Celtic knots on his cheeks and temples, a pentagram on his forehead, and a pit bull and a large polka dot bow tie on his throat. Most of the tattoos that he has actually point toward his white supremacist leanings. The known pedophile in 2022 was sentenced to 6 months of prison time after being charged for assault and property damage. The list of his crimes doesn't end here. He was priorly also charged with a third-degree assault on a man. Looks like the tattoos struck the wrong chord in his life, for he has been involved with different convictions right from the time he got his first artwork inked to his face way back when he was barely 20 years old. 1. Real-life Joker. A man with green hair and a menacing smile. Do you know who we're talking about? Spoiler alert, it's Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker. We're talking about a man from Florida who is perhaps a little too inspired by the supervillain. One look at Lawrence Sullivan and you'll know he wants to put a smile on your face. The wannabe Batman villain has bright green hair and numerous face tattoos, including a carved smile. He's not only interested in looking like a villain, but has taken a shot at trying to be one as well. In short, he has also been behind bars. However, his crimes aren't nearly as sinister as the real Joker. Thank God for that. In 2017, 29-year-old Sullivan was arrested not once, but twice within just 8 days. He was found smoking a joint at an apartment complex in Miami. As soon as cops approached him, he tried to flee, but his attempts were unsuccessful. A few days before, he was arrested for the possession of drugs. And guess what? He was also spotted waving a loaded gun around. In 2017, eyewitness complained about a green-haired man with face tattoos going all crazy, and soon enough, Sullivan was arrested. During his first arrest, Sullivan was treated differently. He said he was treated like a celebrity behind bars because of his appearance. Despite this, his mother still stands by her statement that he is a good son. Mothers.
Number 10. The Vampire Nurse. A Florida nurse was picked up by her Uber driver on April 17, 2021. As he was minding his business behind the wheel, just trying to do his job, the nurse sank her teeth into his neck like a vampire and tried to strangle him to death. This was one of the most horrific Uber incidents ever caught on camera. Michael Hassey Jr. was driving his Uber in the city of St. Petersburg, near Tampa. He picked up 55-year-old nurse Michelle Stillwell. At first, everything seemed pretty normal. Stillwell fell asleep as Hassey was driving, but didn't think much of it. He just kept going towards her destination. Everything went wrong when the woman woke from her slumber in the back seat. She jolted awake as if shaken from a nightmare, then reached around from the back seat and wrapped both her hands around Michael's neck. He tried to pull the car over to get away, but she kept strangling him and he couldn't breathe. She clawed at him, sank her teeth into him, and tried scrambling her way into the front of the car. When Michael pulled out his phone and tried to call the police, she slapped it from his hands. Luckily, Michael was able to pull the vehicle over and escape, leaving Michelle flailing and deranged in the front seat. The nurse was apprehended by the police and arrested on charges of battery. As for why she attacked the Uber driver unprovoked, we just don't know. She has been a registered nurse in the state of Florida since 1996. It's possible she suffers from some kind of mental disorder and had a breakdown that made her believe she was a vampire. The event has left Michael traumatized, seeking professional counseling. He also said he will never be working for Uber again. Number 9. No seatbelt, no ride. In the summer of 2019, yet another brutal attack on a Florida Uber driver was captured on camera. This time, it wasn't a middle-aged vampiric woman, but an unruly male passenger who refused to put his seatbelt on. According to a spokesman from the Tampa Police Department, Taylor Richards was arrested after repeatedly punching his driver in the head. The driver was Joe Leone, who says he picked up his attacker from St. Pete Beach and was supposed to take him to South Tampa. After they got off the interstate, Taylor took off his seatbelt and refused to put it back on. He also started petting the driver on the shoulder in the creepiest way imaginable. Both these things are weird, but it got even worse. Without warning, Taylor flopped halfway up into the driver's seat on top of Joe, then started wailing on him with his fists. Luckily, Joe had allowed Taylor to get in the front seat instead of the back, which gave him a lot of control in the situation. Even as the drunk young man was punching Joe, he was able to defend himself, fight off the attacker, and pull over to call 911. Taylor eventually got out of his vehicle, and a Tampa police officer found him wandering drunk around the intersection of Main Street and Armenia Avenue. Number 8. Miscommunication. Yet another Uber driver in Florida, yes, Florida again, what's going on here, has been assaulted by an irate passenger. The attack happened at about 10 o'clock in the morning in November of 2021. Sume Martinez Arzuaga picked up a man who wanted her to make 2 stops during the trip. Anyone who's ever taken Uber knows this kind of thing is frowned upon. Uber drivers aren't paid for their time, nor for making unscheduled stops. Martinez politely told the man to be quick about his stopping, and then he became angry. Here's how we all know the fabric of society has obviously broken down. The Uber driver tried to be as polite as she could, and the passenger spat at her. She was so shocked by this ridiculous rudeness that she slammed on her brakes, got out of the car, and was about to call 911. But the passenger got out too. He came around to the other side of the vehicle where she was standing and punched her in the face, giving her a black eye and busting her lip open. Then he took off like a coward on foot and vanished. The incident was enough to make Martinez quit Uber and never want to drive for them again. She had recently come from Cuba and had only been working for the rideshare program for 7 months. She believes the man beat her up because she had poor English skills and she didn't fully understand what he was saying. In other words, the passenger got so frustrated that she didn't speak English that he assaulted her and then ran off. Number 7. The angry doctor. Continuing in Florida, a doctor in Miami was accused of attacking her Uber driver in 2016 and put on administrative leave. Her name is Anjali Ramkasoon. She was captured on video verbally assaulting a driver in downtown Miami. She had a full-blown meltdown on this guy, hitting him, throwing things out the window, trying to knee him, and berating him as only a truly furious woman can. She never ended up injuring him, but it was pretty embarrassing for everyone involved. She kept swinging at his face, getting into his car, and throwing his personal belongings in the street. It was basically one big temper tantrum by a drunk, 5-foot-tall doctor. The video of Anjali's insane meltdown went viral, and she lost her job. She, at the time, was a 4th-year neurology resident. After what she did to a driver, she was removed from all clinical duties, and her career was basically ruined. It also affected her family. Her address was leaked. She and other members of her family were targeted online, and she was relentlessly cyberbullied. In truth, Anjali had been having a very bad day when this happened. Her father had been admitted to hospital hours before, and minutes before, she and her boyfriend of 2 years had broken up. It wasn't the Uber driver's fault, and it's no excuse for her child's behavior, but it does make a little more sense why she suddenly snapped. Do you think attacking one Uber driver in a drunken frenzy should ruin your life forever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. Number 6. Kidnapped by her Uber. On March 18, 2021, an Uber driver kidnapped his passenger. The kidnapper's name is Kamal Esalak, a 47-year-old man. He was arrested by the Boston police for locking a woman in his vehicle against her will. It begins, as all these things do, as an ordinary pickup. The woman got into Kamal's Uber, and they started driving. But almost immediately, the woman noticed how strange her driver was acting. He gave off a real creepy vibe, so she asked to be dropped off immediately and let out of the vehicle. Kamal stopped the car, but the child safety locks prevented the back doors from opening. She knew something terrible was about to happen. She could feel it in the pit of her gut. The victim began banging on the windows as hard as she could while screaming at the top of her lungs. She was desperate to get the attention of someone outside of the car. Here's something that will give you nightmares for weeks to come. As she banged on the windows and screamed, Kamal began to slowly claw into the backseat with her. As he did, he laughed insanely to himself. It was something out of a horror movie. Luckily, this woman was not about to be anybody's victim. She managed to spring over the driver and get in the front as he was struggling to force his bulk into the back. She was then able to unlock the door and fall out of the vehicle before running to safety. She got away and Kamal was arrested, but it was a very, very close call. Number 5. Robbed and fired. An Uber driver in New Orleans had the worst night of his life after he was robbed at gunpoint and then fired for having a weapon of his own. It happened on a warm summer night in 2021. Clayton Latsniak picked up a passenger in the French Quarter, and they started off for his destination. The ride went normally. There was some small talk, and then suddenly, the passenger asked him to stop. Clayton put his foot on the brake and turned to look at the passenger, and saw that he was staring down the barrel of a gun. The passenger demanded that Clayton open his console and take out all his valuables. It was as the passenger was robbing Clayton that he noticed the gun sitting on the floor in the front seat. The weapon wasn't loaded. There was not much Clayton could do with it, and so he gave the gun to the robber, and the man took off into the night. It was a pretty bad experience for Clayton, but it got worse when he called Uber to tell them what happened. Uber told Clayton that carrying a firearm is against company policy. Without even hearing his side of the story, they removed his driver profile, and he was out of the job. But there is one good thing about news spreading via social media. When Clayton's story went viral, Uber reinstated his profile and gave him his job back. Number 4. Run over in cold blood. In early 2022, a man in Houston was run over by his Uber driver for being at the wrong pickup spot. The victim, who has preferred to be nameless for his own safety, was helping a friend drop off a vehicle when he called for an Uber through the application. Just moments later, the driver called and asked where he was. He could see the Uber from across the street, so he flagged her over. But she was furious. Instead of doing a U-turn and picking up her passenger, she started swearing insanely into her phone. It was all very strange. The client was so disturbed by the woman's choice of language that he said he was canceling the ride. She responded, "Okay, well, watch me run you over." And then she literally tried to run him over. She came flying towards him on the sidewalk, but he managed to jump out of the way. Then she made a second pass at him, and this time he wasn't so lucky. She managed to catch his left leg and snap it almost in half. He suffered serious fractures to his ankle and had to be taken to the hospital. According to the Harris County Sheriff's Office, they still haven't tracked the woman down. The attacker's license plate with the Uber app didn't match the description of the vehicle. This person had been driving incognito under fake credentials. Number 3. Hit with a hockey stick. In New York City, an Uber driver was left dead after being attacked by a man with a hockey stick. It happened back in November 2017, following a disagreement outside a drinking establishment late on a Saturday. Uber driver Randolph Talk of West New York, a man of 68 years, was bludgeoned by a pedestrian with a hockey stick when he stopped at a red light. The attacker first hit Randolph's vehicle with the stick. When Randolph got out to confront the man, he was beaten senseless. But he wasn't dead. Randolph was able to get back into his vehicle after his attacker ran off into the night. But after Randolph drove just a few blocks, he crashed the car and died. This never would have happened if not for the brutal assault. But here's where things are going to really frustrate you. Obviously, Randolph was totally innocent in this situation. He was just trying to drive people from one place to another and earn enough money to survive. It was Koji Kosugi who became irrationally angry with Randolph and smashed him and his car with a hockey stick. Koji was initially charged with manslaughter, but all the charges were later dropped because the medical examiner concluded that Randolph died due to an underlying medical condition. It wasn't technically manslaughter. The confrontation led to an increase in blood pressure, adrenaline, and Randolph's need for oxygen. With his medical conditions, this was enough to push Randolph's body over the edge. This is why he crashed his vehicle and died, not because of the hockey stick blows to the head. Koji may have indirectly led to Randolph's death, but not directly enough to be a murderer in the eyes of the law. Number 2. The worst Uber driver in history. An Uber driver turned into one student's worst nightmare after a drive went terribly wrong. On April 7, 2021, an LSU student was picked up by Jose Cruz Fernandez. It was supposed to be an ordinary Uber drive, and the ride itself did actually end without any weirdness. Jose dropped the student at her off-campus apartment at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's where things should have ended. But the student noticed that as she walked to her apartment, the driver lingered in the parking lot. Then, about 15 minutes later, he was banging at her door. When the student looked through the peephole of her front door and saw it was the Uber driver, she yelled at him to leave. This caused him to get even more angry. The Uber driver then kicked her door down with the force of a wild elephant. He took one step into the apartment, realized the student's roommate was standing right there as well, and he turned and ran away. This is a typical predator move. If they think it's going to be more difficult than it's worth, they run off like the cowards they are. But running away didn't get Jose off the hook. He was arrested 1 week later and charged with unauthorized entry of an inhabited dwelling. It's not going to earn him much more than a slap on the wrist though, which is pretty terrifying. This dangerous predator will still be out on the streets looking for his next potential victim. Number 1. Drunk on New Year's Day. On New Year's Day 2022, an Uber driver was escorting 2 people home at about 3 o'clock in the morning. This is one of the busiest nights for Uber drivers. Everyone is wasted, and they all need a safe ride home. The issue this time was that Carlos Cordova, the driver, was also wasted. He was picked up by drivers in Rhode Island when a cop saw him swerve repeatedly as he drove erratically down Route 24. This is as he had passengers in the vehicle. The cops pulled Carlos out of the car and had him do a breathalyzer. His blood alcohol content was 0.228, just about 3 times over the legal limit. Carlos was taken to jail for driving under the influence, and his passengers were given safe rides home by the cops.
Number 10. A hard pass. Ariel Ingert offered her services to 3 police officers back in 2015 to have them drop a bunch of charges they were trying to bring her up on. 24-year-old Ariel, on the outside, looked like your typical young woman, but apparently this girl was what you might call open. After she was pulled over in Palm Harbor, Florida, and dragged off to jail, she thought of the only thing she could do to get out of her situation. She had a blood alcohol level of 0.162, over twice the legal limit. She also had a huge bag of marijuana in her purse. And so, once the police got her back to the station and processed, she offered them something she thought they wouldn't be able to say no to. Much to her surprise, no one would take her up on her sexy offer. She first told Deputy Brian Sudbrink that if he dropped the charges and let her go, she'd do whatever he wanted, anything at all. But he refused. Then when she was searched at the detention facility, officers discovered a small bag of cocaine hiding in her bra. As the charges became more and more serious, she became more and more desperate. Finally, Ariel offered her expert services to Deputies Obed Munoz and Eric Biddle. She told them that if they let her go, she would give them each a special treat they would never forget. But in the end, none of the officers would take her up on her lewd offers, and she was charged with 3 counts of bribery on top of the drugs and DUI charges. Number 9. McDonald's bribe. Martell Williams was only 15 years old when he spent 2 nights locked up in the Lake County Juvenile Detention Center. It was February 2022, and he was charged with attempted murder and aggravated battery. And yet, Martell did nothing wrong. The teenager wasn't a criminal in the slightest. He was arrested by the Chicago police and then bribed by the cops into confessing to a murder. This is by far one of the ugliest stories involving the abuse of police powers that's come out in the first few months of 2022. The teenager couldn't have possibly been responsible for the incident on February 4th. At the same time the murder was happening at the dollar store, he was playing in a high school basketball game. It was physically impossible to be there. Nonetheless, 2 officers pulled him out of class and arrested him in connection with the event. According to his family attorney, the police then coerced him into a confession. They tried to bribe him with McDonald's like a 5-year-old. The cop said, "Look, just tell us you were there and we'll take you home in 10 minutes. He refused, so the cops put the teenager in jail and he had to spend 2 miserable nights locked up. The police only let him out once his family was able to provide hard evidence that the kid wasn't even in the general area of the shooting. The officers have dropped the charges, but they are in some seriously hot water. The case has exploded and gained a lot of viral traction. Martell's lawyers are going to do all they can to bring these McDonald's bribing officers to justice. Number 8. The Impersonator. Rebecca Piper has pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony harassment in a very bizarre fake bribery attempt involving her ex and a judge. The charges were filed against her back on September 21, 2021. She was accused of sending an inappropriate package to the judge's house. But to make things more confusing, she made it seem as though her ex sent the package, not her. It all started a year before when Rebecca and a man were in the middle of a custody battle. At the time, Rebecca was a police officer in Minnesota. Her ex was trying to take her kid. 4 days before they were supposed to be in court for the custody hearing, Rebecca sent the package to the judge. The judge was shocked to see a floral box on her doorstep with the words, "Eat A," printed on the inside. Inside the box was a piece of chocolate in the shape of a particular piece of male anatomy. After the box came a suspicious letter. The letter urged the judge to impose an action in favor of Rebecca's ex. If that action was made, a $5,000 cash bribe was promised. But the judge wasn't buying it. She had already been ruling in the man's favor and didn't think it would make sense for him to risk it all over a bribe. She also remembered allegations that Rebecca had previously forged his signature. The judge took the letter for criminal analysis, and the investigators found Rebecca's fingerprints on it. They also found credit card statements connecting Rebecca to the inappropriate chocolate. Rebecca lost her job as a cop. She was put on probation, and she was sentenced to anger management, and she really messed herself up for the custody hearing. The moral of the story here is that you probably shouldn't try to fake bribe a judge. Number 7. Unhealthy restaurants. 3 restaurant owners on a Brooklyn block have been arrested for trying to bribe a city employee. John and Jack DeSanto and Robert Cuba tried to give money to the city employee in exchange for inside information on an upcoming health department inspection. The trio had recently won big on Super Bowl bets and were hoping all that cash would get them by on their next health inspections. But it didn't work. All 3 business owners were foiled by the employee, who turned their shady intentions over to the city's Department of Investigation. According to Commissioner Daniel Court, health inspections are supposed to be rigorous and conducted with no warning. This ensures that all restaurant establishments are following health and safety protocols, but the defendants used corruption and cash to try and cheat the system. In January of 2020, John DeSanto reached out to the city employee with the offer. The employee turned on them immediately, and an undercover investigator joined up to catch them in the act. The trio were caught red-handed trying to exchange $50,000 for information about the upcoming inspections. And this is no surprise, considering all 3 of the restaurants have received sanitary violations in the past. One of them was cited for having filth flies in the food area in 2017. It makes you wonder just how dirty these restaurants were if they were willing to pay $50,000 to cheat the health inspections. Gross. Number 6, an inappropriate relationship. Katie Browder was the assistant coach of the Ole Miss softball team, Ole Miss being the University of Mississippi. In the summer of 2021, she was accused of participating in an inappropriate relationship with one of her student athletes. This came as a pretty big shock to the community, especially since Katie is a married woman. And if getting frisky with her students wasn't a big deal enough, the head coach got in on the scandal as well. He was accused of covering up the relationship by bribing players on the team. He offered them scholarship money if they would remain quiet and keep the affair from getting out. Anyone who's ever spent time with students knows that this is impossible. The head coach could have offered them $1 million in cash each. Still, somebody would have snitched. And that's exactly what happened. The information got out, and there was an investigation. Plus, the student Katie was allegedly in a relationship with was dating another member of the team. Everybody appeared to be cheating on everybody. Just 1 week after the accusations, the investigation was called to a close. Katie and Jamie were cleared by the school's office of any wrongdoing. The head coach was cleared of any bribery charges, and the assistant coach was cleared of getting a little too close and comfortable with the student. What do you think actually happens in this case? Was this a classic example of the school covering up a toxic situation? It seems strange that so many people would come forth with the same accusations, only to have the whole thing swept under the rug a week later. We're not saying these people are innocent or guilty one way or another, but what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And before the video's over, don't forget to subscribe. Number 5. Drug smuggling cop. An ex-cop from Montebello has pleaded guilty to bribery after he admitted to his superiors that he accepted a minimum of $14,000 from a gang member. His name is Rudolph Peterson, and had been working as a police officer when he agreed to be paid in cash to let a U-Haul truck move freely to its destination. As you can probably guess, the U-Haul was filled with illegal drugs. Rudolph's job was to escort the truck to its destination, thereby protecting it from law enforcement. In return for his services, he earned himself $10,000 in cash in a paper bag. It gets worse from here. Not only was he helping to move huge quantities of illegal drugs, but he also snitched on the snitches. He used the law enforcement database to find information on snitches, and then handed the information over to the gang member he was working with. For each snitch he ratted on, he earned himself a cash payment. Rudolph left the police department in August of 2020 and was apprehended soon after. It came out that his treachery started in the middle of 2018 when he sat down to have dinner with the gang member. He'd only been on the police force for 2 years and was already dirty. Tisk tisk. Number 4. Caught on body cam. On June 16, 2016, Margaret Garcia was pulled over for speeding. It was the middle of the night in Florida, and she was driving recklessly way too fast. When the officer pulled her over, things got weird. According to the arrest report, when he approached the car, he could immediately smell marijuana. He also saw a big bag of pot sitting in the center console. When the Miami-Dade officer asked for her license and registration, she pulled the top of her dress down and exposed her bra. And then instead of handing the officer her license like she was supposed to, Margaret handed the officer a fistful of cash. Unfortunately for Margaret, the officer's body cam was recording everything. Even if he had been so inclined as to take the offer, his body cam wouldn't let him. The officer even gave her a chance to put the money away. He told her, "You don't owe me any money." But she didn't get the hint. She kept the money in her hand and asked what he wanted to do. She said she just wanted to go home and that she was prepared to do whatever it took. Long story short, Margaret did not get home that night. She was dragged to jail and booked on charges of bribery and possession of cannabis. Number 3. The Bar Brawler. Joe Angel Hernandez got into a bar fight in Austin, Texas. It was November 1st, 2021. Joe was with a group of people in a bar called Poor Choices when a fight broke out between them and another group. The fight was disrupted and Joe and his friends were kicked out. They could have just called it a night and went home, but they didn't. The gang was spotted lurking outside the bar carrying knives, looking for the people they had been in a fight with earlier. If the police hadn't showed up when they did, there could have been a very serious incident of violence. Someone may have been stabbed that night. But the cops came and arrested the thugs waiting outside the bar. Joe ran from the Austin police, only to get caught about a block later. The officer used a stun gun to bring him to the ground, then walked him back to the patrol car. As Joe was sitting in the back of the car, he offered the officer $300 in cash to just let him go. Before the officer could refuse, he increased it to $500. "Nobody will know," he told the officer. Joe wanted the cop to take the money, open the door, and pretend nothing happened. When the officer refused, Joe offered him a total of $600. But $600 wasn't enough to tarnish the officer's integrity. He took Joe Hernandez to jail and charged him with evading a police officer and bribery. Number 2. Drinking and driving. There were a lot of failed bribes in November of 2021. On the 18th, just 2 weeks after Joe in Austin tried to bribe a cop, a woman in Boca Raton had the same thing happen to her. Deputies pulled over Danilina Maria after she drove into a traffic sign, ran a stop sign, and then smashed into the guardrail on the side of the road. Clearly, she was too drunk to drive. When the officer pulled her over, she couldn't speak properly, her eyes were glazed, and her entire car reeked of alcohol. She failed the sobriety test and was promptly put in handcuffs. That's when the begging started. She was practically crying, urging the officers not to arrest her. She cried about being a single mother. She moaned and moaned, until finally she tried bribery. Marina literally asked, "How much do I have to pay you to not go to jail?" As it turned out, there was no amount of money she could pay. She was brought to jail anyway, charged with DUI and bribery of a public servant, and then released on a $6,000 bond. And number 1, eating your own bribe. In 2014, a man in Russia tried to bribe a police officer. When the officer declined the bribe and informed the man that he was committing a crime, the individual stuffed the money into his mouth and ate it. Yes, he ate his own bribe. According to the reports from Russia, the man was arrested by the police at a train station in the city of Tinda for suspicious behavior. When the police took the man to the station, they found he was in possession of an illegal weapon. It was just a knife, but clearly not for cooking purposes. To try and get himself out of the situation, the man put 3,000 rubles on the table. That's the equivalent of about $86, but only in 3 bills. The officer didn't care about the 3,000 rubles, and so the man stuffed the notes in his mouth and ate them. Alas, that's only caused more problems. The cops took him to the local hospital and had the rubles surgically removed by gastroscopy. A thin tube was lowered into his stomach, and the notes were pulled out before they could be digested. The bribery charge had him looking at up to 2 years in prison. Have you or someone you know ever tried to bribe their way out of a situation? Let us know your stories in the comments below, and thanks for watching. If you like this video, remember to subscribe. See you next time.